Welcome to the Hot Girl School, the podcast where we redefine confidence and go way beyond the reflection you see in the mirror.
We're your hosts, Lauren and Danielle, here to empower you to embrace your inner radiance because confidence is so much more than looks.
Whether you're strutting into an event or conquering the boardroom, join us as we explore topics like self-love, inner strength, and owning your unique journey to confidence.
So grab your favorite drinky and turn up that volume because you're about to unleash your true potential. Welcome back to the Hot Girl School. Hotties, you know that this podcast is all about leaving you better than when you found us. So today we brought in Allie Brooke. She is the founder of the Growth Mindset Gal, and we're going to talk about perfectionism and people pleasing because these two topics are something that I would say most people deal with. So in order to know who you're listening to, I just wanted to give you a little bit of a background. She is a veteran educator, podcast host, and certified emotional intelligence coach who is dedicated to empowering women to overcome the challenges of anxiety and build a resilient mindset. Having personally navigated the complexities of chronic anxiety and burnout, she understands firsthand the debilitating impact it can have on daily life. Through therapeutic support and personal growth strategies, she transformed her experience and developed a deep passion for sharing these transformative tools with others. Her mission is to create a supportive and compassionate community where women can connect, heal, and thrive. By providing practical guidance and emotional support, she aims to equip women with the tools to cultivate a strong, positive mindset and live a fulfilling life. Welcome, Allie.
Woo! Thanks for that. Made me sound so nice.
I know. Well, you are so nice. You've done a lot, and personal development stems from struggles that you've gone through on your own. So do you want to give us a little bit of a background? Whatever you're willing to share. We're all about vulnerability and feeling safe on here.
Okay. So geez, where do I begin? Okay. So do you want like the start of when I started like that people pleasing and like perfectionism started to kind of creep up a little bit?
Yeah, so we'll tie that in so that this is going to give us real life tangibles of how to know if you are a people pleaser and or a perfectionist. And then you can probably touch on, do they blend, and how this related to your experience.
Okay, awesome. So we're going to go in the Wayback Machine all the way to honestly like grade school, elementary school. The anxiety and kind of perfectionism, people pleasing tendencies started to arrive. So with my family, there is my older sister and me, just the two of us. We're 5 years apart, and I love my sister to pieces. But she always was the one that was kind of making the mistakes. And, we kind of grew up in two different childhoods, if you will, because we were 5 years apart. So I'm like 10, she's 15. Like we're in two separate realms. So like she would kind of be going through life and navigating it and making mistakes as one does. And then what does my family and like parents say to me? Don't make the same mistakes your sister has. Learn from your sister's mistakes. So me growing up, I'm like, okay, I'm not allowed to make a mistake. I need to be perfect because my sister makes the mistakes. I need to learn from them. So what that caused me to be hyper vigilant of failure, hyper vigilant of other people, how they perceive me. Do they like me? I wanted to always like make sure that everyone was happy around me, that I was always the good kid doing the right thing, right? The good student, the well-behaved child, always doing everything right. And that's what people would tell me. They're like, you know what, Allie, I never have to worry about you. You're always doing the right thing. You're so self-sufficient. Like all those things, like hyper independence was coming into that as well. So me growing up, I took that as, yay, go me. These are all great things because I was, getting praised for them. And then it wasn't really until like adulthood happens. And I'm like, okay, I did all of the right things. And I never really got in trouble. I got all the good grades. I always stayed on the path. I've been organized. I made sure I was always doing the best for other people. Why am I so anxious? And why am I like feeling very unfulfilled? It's like the mid-20s has started to happen. And I was thinking about it. I'm like, why am I feeling this way? Like everything was good. I had a good job. I was in a great committed relationship. And my family and friends were all good. Like, why do I feel so anxious and overwhelmed and sad? What were these, emotions kind of bottling up? And I kid you not, I was on the train to work one day and I was on the verge of tears and I was like freaking out about my day. And I was like, this is like, I don't think this is normal. The anxiety that's coming up
Nothing
because of
triggered that?
it was kind of more like I was thinking about my day.
Oh, that was
You know,
it. Okay.
yeah, I was like, I woke up and I was like, think of all the things I have to do today, and I have to be perfect at all those things at all times. Like that's what was kind of like bubbling up. And so I started to sit with myself on the train. I was like, I feel like this is not normal. And I don't really want to live like this anymore. So at that moment, it's kind of when I started going on to, my mindset journey, my self-development journey and things like that. But that was kind of like the catalyst where I was in my 20s and I've been perfect for so long and I did all the right things, but why was I still feeling like something was missing? And I think that was because I wasn't my full authentic self, if you will, because I was so worried about the perfectionism and people pleasing in my life.
I mean, you weren't allowed, which is funny because when you were explaining all of the adjectives that people use to describe you, they're great adjectives.
Yeah.
It does not feel like stabbing with each
Mm-hmm.
one, but here
Mm-hmm.
you are like somehow suppressing and I guess almost putting you in a box to make sure you turn out a certain way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Very interesting. Okay, so the two definitely blend together.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay. And I mean, I kind of feel like when somebody's so perfect, we'll say, and people pleasing, there's tendencies to just rebel. Like, did you ever have a rebellious time period or even like a few months just to like get it out of your system? You have to live life. You have to make
Mm-hmm.
mistakes. So how did the not making any mistakes if affect and impact you as you got into your 20s?
So the fun part is I was still trying to be perfect. Like you would think it would happen maybe in college, like you're finally like I went away to school, you would think I would try things out. No, still very perfect, always wanted to do the right things. It wasn't until I got into the workforce and I was in my 20s, I was making my own money, like I had my own job, my own career. So it kind of, uplifted me a little bit, not really have to depend on anyone because I was like making my own money and things like that. But what happened is actually the pandemic was when I was like the rebellious, ironically enough. So
I'm like, you're rebellious with nowhere to go.
with nowhere to go, like clearly she was having think life is so funny like that sometimes. And it was funny because I was remote teaching, right? Because I'm a teacher, and I was remote teaching in my childhood bedroom, like during the pandemic, because I still lived at home and everything. And so what the pandemic showed me when we started to like slow down and everything, that not everything needs to be perfect. Not everything is going to go according to plan because no one planned for a pandemic to happen in 2020. And I started to realize that I don't need to take myself so seriously because when you have those perfectionism tendencies, you take yourself very seriously. Like you're yourself's worst critic, worst enemy, because you want to be perfect all the time. Because that's what I perceive that as that gives me value when I'm perfect, right? Because I got that validation. So when we were slowing down and we were just at home, I had a lot of free time on my hands. And I began to think, I was like, wow, none of the things that really I cared about most days doesn't matter anymore because the pandemic started to shift of how life works, how we view life, what's important in life, because it stopped so much, the world stopped. And it gave me time and space to understand that I don't have to take everything so seriously. I don't have to be perfect all the time. I don't have to be always 5 steps ahead, prepared for anything. And I don't have to people please. I don't have to be available for everyone at any time because the pandemic, you couldn't be with anybody, right? Because you had to
Right.
socially distance. So then I was able to reflect and look back and be like, wait a minute, I don't have to be like this because I use perfectionism as a control tool or anxiety as a control tool. And then when that was taken away from me, because I can't control the pandemic, I realized that control and perfectionism is all kind of this illusion where you have to kind of learn how to adapt, learn, and grow. And those are the best ways to navigate life rather than contain, control, and be perfect all the time and always be worried about what other people think of you and where your life's
Wow.
going.
That is, everybody had such a different experience during the pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
And that's interesting that that's where it took you.
Mm-hmm.
So you
Yeah.
started to notice these things about yourself that all of a sudden, I mean, did you feel empty? Did you feel sad? Were you crying? Like what was the emotion that went along with all of that? Because there's
Mm-hmm.
got to be a little bit of like shock value of, oh my gosh, like what am I doing? Like when you have
Mm-hmm.
epiphanies like that, that's a major one.
Yeah, and there was a lot of emotions that were swirling around. Obviously, it was still anxiety because of the pandemic, what's going to happen next in life.
Hmm.
And it was a lot of anger at first because I was so frustrated with myself that I let the perfectionism and people pleasing tendencies really control my life and let that anxiety that's associated with those behaviors really control my life.
Hmm.
And it really limited me. I was like, am I really reaching my full potential in this way? And I got very frustrated. I was like, who knows where I could have went if I didn't limit myself because of perfectionism and people pleasing. So anger happened at first. And then what that anger shifted into was kind of relief because I was able to then let go of the limiting beliefs and those narratives that you carry with yourself with people pleasing and perfectionism. It gave me a sense of freedom that I actually can just be myself and that would be enough. I'm allowed to make mistakes and the world won't come crashing down. Because even at work, I was always afraid to make a mistake. I was like, oh, if I make one mistake, oh, I'm going to get fired. That's like that
Oh
perfectionism
no, that's not a good
constraining you.
place to be.
No. So then once the pandemic happened and the way education was, going, it changed a whole lot. And so then things and expectations were loosened and not taken as seriously, right? Because we're going through a pandemic. I was like, wow, the things I thought were everything in my job actually don't matter because they fall to the wayside when like big life things happen. So it was a beautiful relief and freedom that's like, I'm going to be okay. Even if I make a mistake, even if I'm not perfect, right? Then I'm going to be okay. Life's still going to move on. You can learn from your mistakes. If you need to apologize, apologize. And then you move on and you learn and grow from that. That gives you more freedom, more flow, rather than trying to be perfect all the time. So that way you never make a mistake or like quote unquote get in trouble or what have you.
Yeah, because as a perfectionist, every time you make a mistake, it is like the world is ending
Mm-hmm.
because you have such high expectations and standards for
Mm-hmm.
yourself that, and it's not really that anyone else, but I think that there is still a passive aggressive side that comes out when you're a perfectionist.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know, like, okay, so I want to pause there because I want to like pick up and like, let's put some teaching moments in here.
Sure.
So
Mm-hmm.
it sounds like there are quite a few ways to detect if you are one or other, but you're not necessarily both. You can be that, you can be
Yeah.
perfectionist or people pleasing independent of each other, or you can be a
Mm-hmm.
blended of the
Yes.
two. Okay. So you
Mm-hmm.
want to go over kind of how people can identify if they're thinking, okay, I think I'm more of this, but let's hear it.
Okay, so to kind of detect perfectionism is it's a little bit tricky because I actually didn't realize that I had perfectionism tendencies until I actually went to therapy because I had anxiety. So I was like, okay, let me go to therapy. And she started talking about like my work ethic. And I pretty much said what I told you guys. And she goes, do you think you have like a hint of perfectionism? And I said, what do you mean? She goes, well, you do have a very good work ethic. And I'm like, yeah, like you're supposed to have a great work ethic. But she was like, yes, but it gets to a point where you're so afraid if you make a mistake that the world's going to end. And that's a very unconstructive behavior or an irrational thought, if you will. A lot of the times that's called. And I was like, oh, okay. So once someone said it to me like that, I go, okay, now I can start digging a little deeper. So if you, right, you do everything right? You always want to be perfect. The mask never comes off. You're kind of always in like a performative state all the time. And you never really feel like yourself unless you're kind of like by yourself or maybe a very strong like inner circle. And you always feel like you're putting on an act for people. You may have perfectionism. Also, if you have a strong fear of failure and it gives you a lot of anxiety to ever fail or be judged and things like that, perfectionism. If you're ever afraid to make a mistake in life or at your job and you think about it, if you fail and you have your worst inner critic comes out and you're not like, you know what, it's okay, let's learn and grow. You're like, no, you're a terrible person. How dare you? You're a loser. Like all those really harsh words come into play. Perfectionism could be in your wheelhouse. And it's
Okay.
very tricky because Perfectionism, you would think it should be a good thing. You should want to quote unquote be perfect all the time, but it kind of sways away from just being natural as a human of we're imperfect, right? We're going to make mistakes. That's life. That's how you learn, how you grow. You don't learn and grow if you try to be perfect all the time, because you close yourself off to the learning and the growth and the opportunities from that. So if have really big self talk with like talking negative about yourself, strong inner critic, afraid to make a mistake and fear of failure, that can definitely be towards perfectionism. Now,
Yeah, and
people
when
pleasing.
you
Yeah.
when you like sometimes you just feel shattered as a
Yeah.
perfectionist that it
Mm-hmm.
didn't go your way,
Mm-hmm.
and you don't really know, because you said if you're always living in a performative state,
Mm-hmm.
who are you? You almost don't know who you are because you're such a people pleaser to make sure that
Mm-hmm.
everyone likes you and that you are well received to whoever it is, whether it's work, family, romantic, whatever.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
And those moments when you realize that you weren't perfect can be dark and isolating.
Mm-hmm. And you become defensive too sometimes with perfectionism.
Mm.
When people try and call out your mistakes, a lot of defense comes up. I kind of started to realize that a lot going into a romantic relationship, where if I thought if I wasn't the perfect significant other, I'm a bad person. That sort of thing would come up a lot,
Wow.
that I wasn't allowed to make a mistake. I need to be the perfect girlfriend as well. You can't make mistakes because guess what? With an anxious attachment kind of happens, right? If I make a mistake, they're going to leave me. If I'm not
Right.
perfect, they're not going to want to be with me anymore. So again, you're constantly trying to be hyper vigilant of how people are perceiving you and how well you're doing at whatever task is at hand. And when you're living again in that very performative state, it's exhausting. So people are like, well, why am I so exhausted all the time? Or is it maybe because you're constantly, playing a performance and you're trying to be perfect on all ends of your life, and you don't give yourself a minute to breathe and relax because you're constantly worried about how people are going to perceive you, and you hate asking for help too as a perfectionist. That's another
Mm.
big thing. Hate it. Absolutely. Because that means you think as a perfectionist, if you're asking for help, you're weak. You don't want to show vulnerability.
Right.
You're weak if you ask for help. Mm-hmm.
Lots of good gold nuggets in there of like signs to decide, like just to understand a little bit better. Like we all might think we're perfectionists, but when it's broken down, you can like take
Mm-hmm.
untangle everything and understand where you lie on the spectrum.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so let's go into people pleasing.
All right.
Is it similar?
It is similar because perfectionism, you want to be perfect at everything in your life. And
Mm-hmm.
people pleasing is you want to be perfect within your relationships, like very specifically. So
Mm.
with people pleasing tendencies, you're always worried about what people think of you and how, you receive a lot of external validation from other people. That gives you your worth. So you want to feel useful and you want to feel helpful. That's all well and good. But where do you cross the boundary of always worried about what other people think and fixing and helping other people, but never worrying about or trying to help yourself, right? You'll drop anything for anybody. That's good, but would you do the same for yourself? So I think a lot of the times women, we get caught in a lot of people pleasing tendencies because that's the way that we're raised in society, is always be ready and helpful and be of service and be nurturing and caring. And yes, you should be that way, but you have to make sure to have a nice healthy, constructive behaviors that could be people pleasing as well. You have to make sure that you have boundaries in place. People know how to interact with you, because if people see, oh, I can just simply take advantage of your time, of your energy, right, any
Mm-hmm.
things that you bring to the table, people are going to overstep boundaries all the time with you. People are going to walk all over you if
Especially
you're
if you
people
let
pleasing,
them.
especially if you let
I
them.
just used
You
this.
can't say no. You have to learn to say no. And I had one of my really close friends, and as in the education field, you want to be ready to help at all times, but boundaries need to be put in place. So I think especially a lot of teachers, struggle with people pleasing tendencies a lot, because you want to be there for everybody at all times. And I remember she couldn't say no to anything at work, like just always said yes, even if it exhausted her, even if it would cause her to stay late and she didn't have time to do it. And I remember I looked and I was like, why can't you just say no? Because the person was asking her to do something. She goes, maybe, I think I can. I have to check my schedule. Like, I can get back to you, but I think so, but maybe. And I was standing there like with the conversation. And after the conversation was over, I go, why couldn't you just say no? just say no. You're already busy enough. The world's not going to end if you say no. So with people pleasing, you think the world is going to end if you say no, sorry, I can't do that, or no, sorry, I did not like the way you treated me. I didn't like the way you said that. Like that, those sort of things of how people interact with you. We think, oh, we'll make a lot of friends and be happy with everybody if we just go with the flow and we just say yes to everything. We're easygoing. But how you let people interact with you, that's how people learn how they're going to interact with you. So if you don't set the boundaries in place, then they're going to create the boundaries of how to interact with you. So I know that we love to be helpful and kind of be there and be a good friend, be a good family member, spouse, what have you, be a good coworker. That's all well and good. You should be that way. But make sure that boundaries are set in place with your time and your energy, because unfortunately, people will take advantage of that. And that's where you kind of dive into a lot of burnout. And that's why you could be exhausted all the time, because you're never giving time for yourself and you're giving all your time to other people.
And you get resentful. Like you get mad that you have another thing that you committed to. And I'm sure when your friend was sitting there let me look at my calendar. Like, first of all, she's probably stuttering kind of like I am right now, because you don't know how to respond. You're uncomfortable. And number two, she's like, okay, if I commit, I have to think of how to get out of it. So now it's double the work instead of just saying no up front. So I actually just had somebody who was talking to me about how hard it is for her to say no. And I kind of just put it into young people terms, and it's kind of just modern day terms. Think of the universe as your algorithm. Whatever you are willing to tolerate, you are going to keep receiving. Same in Instagram. If you are scrolling and you keep liking the same type of posts, you're going to get the same type of feed. But if you finally say no, or you stop paying attention to that, then you pivot. And now you've got something that you actually want to fulfill your time with and enjoy. And like, it will be a much more fruitful life if you can learn to say no. It's hard. It's
yeah, because so many people are listening and they're probably like, yeah, I really want to learn like how to say no. How do I? But it's so scary because you're not used to doing that. Right. So a lot of emotions can come up as a people pleaser, because you always just, again, with perfectionism too, you always want to do the right thing and do your best by people, because yes, you should do that. So you should always go in, and I think we talked about this a little bit, funny enough, when you were on my podcast as well, is like preparing for these interactions. If you want to set a boundary with somebody at work, family, or friends, you have to get really clear on what's important to you and then how to make the boundary out of that. So for example, one of my huge things for me is time, because, and also energy, they kind of coincide with each other, because as a teacher, I am high energy all day, every day, and trying to solve everybody's problems. And that's teaching, and I live for that. It's so fun. Okay, well, now it's 3:30. It's time to go home. See you later. Because I knew if I want to be an efficient teacher, okay, that means these are the time and energy boundaries I need to set in place. I need to learn how to say no. And you're not a bad person, because that will come up for people. You're not a bad person when you say no to things that do not serve you. And the thing is, you don't have to come up with this excuse. You don't have to say why, right? No is a complete sentence. No, sorry, I'm not available that day or at that time. And that is it.
It is that simple. Yes. So step one is ask yourself, how do you feel? Do you want to do it? Do you want to spend your time, money, energy with this person on this project, whatever it is? And number two, no is a full sentence. Feel free to say that time doesn't work for me. Now, if you want to reschedule, that's different, because you wanted a part of your life.
Right.
But to just say yes and then you wasted the time, I think until you realize that time is completely irreplaceable.
Yes.
That's when you have that light switch go on and you feel like, okay, I'm no longer going to let people waste my time. And at least in the business world, an easy one is, you know what? I'm only taking appointments that align with my goals right now. And that's a lot easier to say than no, that time doesn't work for me, at least for me, because people can understand like, oh, going out and whatever, spending time in a bar doesn't align with her goals. Okay, I'm going to ask someone else. And then they kind of like shy away for a little while. So there's different ways to go about this. There's so many ways to reframe how to say no. Okay, so we got some good like lines there.
Yep.
Another question. Why are people proud to call themselves a perfectionist?
Ooh, that's such a good question because I was holding that. I didn't really call myself a perfectionist, but being perfect, I held myself in such a high regard. Like that was a very prideful moment. And I think we do that because we're taught growing up that you need to be perfect to succeed. And I remember when in school or in family instances, when someone made a mistake or someone failed at something, they were ridiculed, they were talked down upon. You didn't want to be like so and so, that person's a failure. And that kind of external talk then all of a sudden gets absorbed in the internal talk.
Mm-hmm.
And so, depending on, where you grew up and who was in your school, like people say things, these were very common things that were said. So, if you see so and so, oh, they failed a test, right? And then if they failed a test, they're like, oh, my parents are going to be so upset with me that I failed the test. I'm going to get in so much trouble. You've had those conversations with friends. That instills with you, oh, I can't fail because then I'm going to get in trouble. People are going to be disappointed in me because we're taught that the external validation is everything. Once you start to sit with yourself, and I think this happens a lot in like your 20s because you're finally like kind of on your own, making your own decisions, you start to be with yourself a lot because think about your whole life. You're usually with family or you're at school. You're surrounded by people, the noise, their opinions or expectations all the time, 24/7. But once you're in your 20s, sometimes some of us live, by ourselves or we have just more alone time. We have time to sit with ourselves and be like, hey, what actually really matters to me and who am I as a person and how do I want to move throughout this life? How do I want to navigate my life? And you start to do a little reflection on your past narratives, behaviors, patterns. And perfectionism comes up so easily because it's instilled in us growing up. And it is like being a good person and doing the right thing is great. And we get praise for doing the right thing and being perfect, the good work ethic, the perfect friend, family member, coworker, what have you, perfect employee. And then we see when people make mistakes, we see or hear the bad things that are spoken about them. You see the gossip that's spoken about them, right? And so we go, oh, I don't want that to happen to me.
So then you stay in your lane because you're
Stay in your lane.
fearful of what that's not people pleasing. That's just scared to do the wrong thing or to be a black sheep or to,
Yep.
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Because those
Yep.
all have negative connotations as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So yeah, and especially being like the black sheep or thinking different than the echo chamber around you, because that's connected right to perfectionism, that you also tend to, align your morals with people around you as well. But do those morals actually align with you? Do those thought processes actually align with you? And if not, it's okay to think differently and think for yourself, because I've been in so many instances and conversations where I see people playing the perfectionist game, putting on the performance, where they're just in the conversation and trying to be perfect and say all the right things at the right time and not really sitting and speaking in their truth because they're so afraid of that perfectionism and that fear of failure and being seen or judged as different or not the same, not being perfect, doing the performance. That happens all the time.
But let's be real. If you are going to be a perfectionist, it becomes so ingrained in who you are. Like it takes a lot of self-reflection, a lot of self-awareness to understand literally how to untangle who is you and who is the person who's trying to be so perfect. And it's a bumpy road to get out of perfectionism. But I think that once you get there, because I feel I've been down this road, once you get there, it's just like, you know what? Life's messy. It's okay.
Yeah.
I don't have to like there. I had this favorite quote in college that was, a pretty girl. No, what is it? A smart girl is more interested than having fun and than looking pretty, and it just was
Yes,
like,
ma'am.
right. You'd rather have a personality and be fun and enjoy your life rather than trying to be so perfect and fit in a box and what, so people can look at you.
Yeah,
It
exactly.
just, there's
And that's so much effort. And for what?
so much effort.
And for
Especially
what?
because you have to keep up the charade, which, like I said, it's not a charade. At some point, it is just who you are.
Yep.
But it's exhausting and you don't necessarily want to be that. So my next question is like, how do you handle self-care as a perfectionist if you're always, and a people pleaser, if you're always trying to A, be perfect, and B, please everyone else? When does that self-care come into play? And how do you, like, what are some tips on that you've got?
Yeah. And one of the greatest things I ever did in my self-development journey was start to journal, because I was people pleasing and perfectionism because that's what other people wanted me to be. But what does Allie want? What does she want? I was so disconnected from the authenticity because I was doing the performance all the time. So I remember I just sat down one day and I was like, I'm going to start journaling again. And I'd do a whole thing. I would sit down, make some coffee, put on some nice music in the morning. I do it on a weekly basis. And I would sit down and I would open up the conversation with myself. Who am I? What do I like to do? Who do I want to be? Like very like surface level stuff, right? Because you're kind of rediscovering who you are. We don't have to do the big deep dive yet, but just being like, hey, how'd the week go? How'd you respond to that?
Surface level.
Surface level first date vibes in the journal. Like literally go on a first date with yourself, write it down, and honestly ask yourself questions that you would ask someone on like a first date, right?
I
Very
love this
simple,
exercise.
very easy. And that's what I started off with, just to remember who I am as a person. And then as the weeks went on, right, the questions started to get deeper, more philosophical, more connecting. And it would take me maybe 10 to 15 minutes top. Like it doesn't, you can go for as long as you want, but what worked the best for me was the 15 or 10 minutes. Maybe the longest I ever did was 20 minutes. But that's all you need. And I would usually do it in the morning. Some people also do it at the end of the day as more of a reflection, where journaling in the morning is more setting in intention. If you'd like to do that, whatever kind of works best for you. But journaling is opening up the conversation with yourself, because then you start to learn how to talk with yourself. And that becomes very important, creating a very strong inner dialogue, because that strong inner dialogue comes up when you're lifing, when you're doing the thing, when you are out and about and you have to make a decision on something. For example, I think it was a couple of days ago, I made a minor mistake, at work. And at first I like the freeze happened and I was like, oh, I made a mistake. Like, when something happens and like the whole world like freezes for a second, it's like tunnel vision. That happened. And I had a choice in that moment. It was kind of like a video game. I had a little choice and it was like, I can either panic about this and spiral and get in my head and trash talk myself, because of perfectionism, she's always going to be there, because that's been ingrained for 20 to 30 years at this point. She's going to be in there. Or I can be, the new habit that I'm learning is to give myself grace. What's the truth in this mistake? Is bad things going to happen? No. Do I need to maybe apologize? Maybe. Okay. Do I just need to learn for next time? Yes. And before I even go to that spot, the first thing is, I'm okay. I am safe. Everything's fine. Everyone makes mistakes. You have that conversation in your head to take you down, because when you get into that freeze mode, you make the mistake, you are up here in the clouds and you have to bring yourself down and really talk to yourself and say, you're fine, you're safe, and you are okay. Then that's you regulating yourself. Because if you don't emotionally regulate, when you make a mistake and you have that perfectionism tendencies, that's where we go off into the ether and we panic and we get inside our heads. So when that moment happens, before you do anything, regulate and talk yourself down. And how to learn how to do that is doing these journal entries on a weekly basis, or you could do them on a daily, but it worked for me is on a weekly basis, because once you learn how to talk to yourself, when you're in the world and things are going to happen, you're able to be your own best friend, your own coach, your own confidant, if someone's not there to help you in that moment. So that way you don't create maybe stress that doesn't need to be there yet. As a perfectionist, you tend to create stress that's not even there yet. Why go through all that if you don't have to, and you just give yourself grace? Now, you can be concerned depending on the mistake, and really think about it and be like, okay, I made a mistake and I really have to make sure, I learn from it and I do better. Maybe I have to have a conversation with someone, but at least you go into solution mode of the mistake rather than I'm just going to panic because I wasn't perfect.
It sounds like the exercise that you're giving to use in real life, the step that you use after you get comfortable having those journal conversations with yourself. It sounds like that's proactive instead of reactive to the situation. And while I don't do exactly that, I can certainly say, let's be very clear that this is going to take quite a few times to get right before you actually start implementing it regularly and it becomes normal. And it might even be uncomfortable the first
Oh
few
yeah,
times you
it's
try,
icky
because you're like,
sometimes.
wait, what am I doing? It's
What's up?
okay to, it's okay. Like my
As a
things are,
perfectionist, it's okay to do this messy.
yes. And
Healing can be
like you
messy
said,
too.
talking to the person in you who you know she's there
Mm-hmm.
and acknowledging her, I think that also helps calm that side of you down. But
Yes.
it's also, you're like learning how to be someone else if you're not a
Mm-hmm.
perfectionist. Same with
Mm-hmm.
people pleasing. You're learning that it's okay to stand up for yourself and give yourself grace, which is what you said.
Mm-hmm.
And it's uncomfortable in the beginning.
Yeah.
I
Mm-hmm.
it just
And
is.
that's okay, because like I love how you said you're
Yeah,
meeting someone new, because you are. Because
that's the growth.
a lot of the habits and patterns that you have in your life, they get ingrained in you by the age of 7, believe it or not. When I found that out, I was like, that's wild. So by the age 7, how you perceive the world and the patterns and thoughts and actions that you have are within you. So there's a lot of deconstructing that needs to happen. And there still will be times where you didn't set the boundary even though you wanted to, you freaked out and didn't give yourself grace when you made a mistake. That's going to happen. To this day, I mean, I've been doing this work essentially for like almost 5 years now, and I still have weeks where I'm like, wow, that wasn't, I reacted, and was not proactive. I was very reactive in that moment. And that's okay, because it's about a process. It's not like, oh, I'm going to learn something and I'm going to be great at it within a month.
Right,
That's
like
not
don't be a
how it works.
perfectionist when you're trying to go through the process.
Yeah, like literally. And I know you're going to want to do that so bad, but a lot of the times it's going to be a little bit messy, and you're going to kind of need to navigate and learn, because this is a new skill that you are learning, because you've always thought that like I need to people please and I need to be perfect, and now this is a new evolution of yourself, right? So you also got to get the hang of it. So it's totally fine if like you're journaling for the first time and you're like, this is weird. Like
Yeah,
this
it's
feels
totally weird.
awkward. Like, dear diary, like I was kind of laughing at myself at first too. But once you create like a habit, your body and your mind actually start to look forward to it. Like I can't wait to journal tomorrow morning. Like I'm very
Right.
excited because we're doing this on a Friday. I'm like, I cannot wait to journal tomorrow and give myself that slow morning and everything like that. Your brain starts to crave and want to do the constructive behaviors of being more
Yeah.
proactive than reactive.
That is like that's so special, because I don't think a lot of people
Mm-hmm.
take the time to get to know themselves.
Right.
And I don't think
Mm-hmm.
they take time to spend time alone,
Mm-hmm.
because it's sometimes it's like not the cool thing to be alone or to
Mm-hmm.
enjoy your own company. And it's definitely not spoken about. What's being cool is always being out and
Mm-hmm.
seen and
Mm-hmm.
posting on social media and
Yep.
like, I'm here, I'm in this outfit that I'm never going to wear again. Like there's so many
Mm-hmm.
things that kind of distract us from
Mm-hmm.
wanting to be home alone. I don't know if it's an age thing, but getting older is so much nicer to just
Oh
be
yeah.
at home
Mm-hmm.
alone,
Mm-hmm.
doing what you want to do, not having anybody pull at you.
Mm-hmm.
And that's another journey in and of itself. But even if you are the people pleasing kind, it's okay to say no just to sit at home by yourself. Like
Oh
there's no need to give an excuse. I don't care if it's that you're watching paint dry. If
yeah.
that's what you're doing, that's what you're doing. If you've never read Why Men Love Bitches, and the one
Mm-hmm.
girl in one of the chapters is like, I'm sorry, I have a Tupperware party to the guy who wanted to take her out.
Mm-hmm.
And she truly did. He like found her at the house with a friend because they
Uh-huh.
posted on Facebook or whatever. And he
Mm-hmm.
went and showed up and he knocked on the door to like catch her.
That's wild.
But
Like,
like,
no, like she just
because
loves
that's like
Tupperware.
a weird thing that somebody's that into Tupperware, that they're going to a Tupperware party, that it's hard to
Mm-hmm.
believe that that's what makes somebody happy. But that's like the perfect example of putting yourself first and doing what you want to do
Oh yeah.
instead of going on the date. Maybe you want to go on the date, but guess what? He can probably go tomorrow
Yeah.
or the next day or in a week. If he wants to meet you, he will.
Yeah. That's
Tangent,
the thing
but
too.
a good example.
Yeah, because I love that example, because you know what? We're so afraid that if we're not there for the person because we want to take care of ourselves, let's say, we're always afraid of how they're going to react or respond. But the people who truly do care about you, whether it's friends, family, significant others, what have you, if the person does truly care about you, they will be understanding. Like when I started putting up boundaries that like I could not go out on Friday nights anymore, like I'm just exhausted, I'm not your girl, but I'm your girl on Saturday, like when I started saying that to people, I started to realize who my friends and who they really are, because my friends that I still have to this day from that boundary were like, yeah, no problem. We'll see you tomorrow. Maybe we can do something tomorrow. Maybe we can do brunch instead. Like, they're very open to it because I was just honest and upfront. Like, I'm exhausted. I don't want to go. I didn't try to like go out and then, like you said, be resentful and be tired and don't want to be there or make up some excuse. I just said, no, I'm just exhausted and I don't want to go. And my friends were like, that's fine. We'll see you another time. The other people that were like, offended that I didn't want to go out with them, right? Because that sometimes happens.
Yeah.
That's more of a them thing than a you thing.
Mm-hmm.
What you learn with, getting very aware of interactions, a lot of the times the interactions with people and like taking things personally, it's more about them than it is you. It's more of a projection onto you about what's going on within themselves than what you actually said or did.
And
So
it could be kind of selfish. Like maybe they just need somebody to go out that night because they need to blow off steam. And if you are the person that always says yes, then guess what? You're dragged into it. Yeah.
So if you say no, or you say a specific day, I'm not your girl, they know that. And like I said, the people who are your true friends, they'll be understanding. And the people that like you said, used you because you're always the girl that would say yes to going out. And so if they wanted to go out, they would always, call you because they knew you weren't going to say no. What kind of friendship is that though?
Yeah,
that's very
one-sided, lopsided friendship. So speaking of the girls who did support you, when you are trying to stop the habits of people pleasing and perfectionism, how do you continue to support others without crossing your own boundaries that you've put up?
Ooh, that's such a good question. I think voicing boundaries very clearly and directly with my friends, even family, even at work, people then, because I spoke up and I advocated for myself for a specific boundary, people understand then how I work and then how to interact with me. And granted, there are going to be some times where you may have to go to an event and you're tired and you really don't want to, but sometimes you do need to be supportive of the friend or what have you. That's going to happen. I'm not saying you're going to put this boundary in place. I think we spoke about this last time. Like, here's the boundary and it's never going to change ever, right? Boundaries can change.
There's all these exceptions.
There's all these exceptions. Boundaries can change throughout, life and people who you're interacting with. You can still be there for people, right? And be supportive, but just make sure you're directly communicating with them. Don't be flaky. Do not say, oh, yes, I'm totally going to be there and cancel last minute. That's very counteractive. Like, that's not helping anybody.
Right.
Because then they're like, okay, then I get you're trying to do self-care, but now I don't feel supported, right? If you say, hey, I love that for you. I'm so excited. I'm going to maybe send like a card over or a gift over. Maybe you can't make it somewhere, but you send something over because you can't make it. That's still showing your support. Or if you can't be there, but you're able to give them a quick call and say like, good luck on whatever you're doing, but you just couldn't make it, you can still be supportive in other ways rather than going to the place if you simply can't make it or, you have that boundary in place. There's other ways to support people as long as you directly communicate it with them instead of kind of being that flaky friend that sometimes shows up and is supportive and sometimes is not, or, isolates themselves, but doesn't like talk about or communicate it with it at all. There's all different levels. And, people we understand through conversations. So if you can't be there, think of another way that you could be supportive without maybe giving up that boundary that you set in place. Because that's the thing with boundaries. If you set a boundary and then you say it once and then you never, stand up on business with that boundary, then people are like, oh, she doesn't mean it. I can just do whatever. She's still going to show up.
Totally.
If you don't
like
stand
a
up on
one-time
it.
thing. Yeah, my mom always said, if you make a threat, you got to follow through.
Oh, yeah.
That's mainly with children. As a parent.
It's so true, though, because a lot of the times your word is everything. And people tend to forget that everyone says, oh, like actions speak louder than words, which is true to an extent, but your word does mean a lot to people too. So if your word doesn't match your action, people are going to be like, how do I interact with this person? And then people are very confused of how to be with you. So if you are very clear and you directly communicate a boundary and you stand on that business with that boundary and you have a conversation with somebody, you like, don't just put a boundary and like, that's it. Like if someone's like, hey, why are you doing this? If you want to explain to them, hey, this is why I'm setting this boundary, you have a cordial conversation with them, that's totally fine. But
and
make sure that you're consistent.
That's a way to go about it. Like that's a really mature.
We're all adults here.
Yeah, that's a mature conversation, but it's a hard conversation.
Yeah.
Most people are going to avoid it. Maybe they'll have it in text, which means it can be
Mm-hmm.
misconstrued.
Yes.
It's not easy. Hard stuff becomes easier the more you do it.
Mm-hmm.
So why don't you rip the band-aid off, people, and just get started?
Mm-hmm. And I speak to so many people where they're like, oh, breaking these people pleasing tendencies or perfectionist tendencies is hard, but so is staying in the spot where you know you're being
Mm,
mistreated or you know you're not
totally.
taking care of yourself. So it's kind of like that choose your heart. Do you want to, stay stuck in that spot and be burnt out and have to deal with it because you didn't take the extra steps, or take the extra steps to improve yourself, whatever that may be for you? Yeah, that's going to be hard and difficult, but is it going to be worth it because your life is going to look a lot better and what you want it to be?
That was a great note to end on.
Thank you. I try. I try.
I absolutely love that. Yeah, choose your hard. And you know what? You already know how you feel. You're spent, you're tired, you're
Yeah.
drained, you're exhausted, you are tight, you're getting resentful, whatever it is that you are. So why
Mm-hmm.
not try a different road, which is the growth mindset that you stand for, that I stand for. Develop
Mm-hmm.
yourself a little. Try a different route. See what it is and where it can take you and how life changes and what you attract in this new mindset.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Wow. This was such a great conversation. I feel
It
like we could just
was.
keep
I was like,
talking forever.
I know. I was looking. I was like, oh, it's 4:50 already. Where we could have won it. Like, there was so much more. As always, like we always say, that there could be 20 other things to talk
Always.
about. But time
Yeah.
flies when you're having a great conversation.
Well, these are fascinating topics and you're obviously very knowledgeable. So
Mhm.
please watch, support, like, and follow Allie at the Growth Girl Mindset. If you want to tell us where we can catch you, feel free.
Yes. My major hub, honestly, for the Growth Mindset Gal is Instagram. That's where you can find me the most. And I also have my website. It's thegrowthmindsetgal.com. Easily find me. And that's where you can find all the different ways that I can support you.
Absolutely. Oh my gosh. Well, we're excited to see more of you. And thank you so much for being here in your time and speaking to these two very difficult topics.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me on, Lauren. That was so much fun.
Absolutely. Bye, hotties.
Bye.